They started chewing up my fence with a wood chipper before I'd even had time to finish being mad, and the woman overseeing it stood there smiling like she was cutting a ribbon at a grand opening instead of destroying 7 grand of my property in broad daylight. I've seen bureaucracy in war zones. I've seen pencil pushers reroute real work with fake authority, but I swear to God, nothing prepared me for a suburban HOA president in a floral muumuu telling me my fence was an emergency threat to property values. That was the moment I realized this wasn't a disagreement. It was an invasion. My name's Mark Riley. I served 20 years in the Army Corps of Engineers, retired as a sergeant first class, and I built that cedar picket fence the same way I built everything else in my life, carefully, correctly, and with every piece of paperwork squared away before the first post ever touched dirt. My wife Sarah and I bought that house because after years of deployments, airports, boxes, and goodbyes, we wanted something boring. Birds in the morning, coffee on the porch, our rescue German Shepherd General finally having a yard where he felt safe. For 2 years, that's what we had. Then Karen got elected HOA president. Now, every neighborhood has one person who mistakes being noticed for being important, but Karen turned it into an art form. She'd lived there 30 years, knew everybody's business, and ran on this big dramatic promise about restoring standards and protecting the community, which turned out to mean harassing anyone who didn't kiss the ring. At the first meet and greet, she asked about my background. I told her military engineering, and she patted my arm like I was a slow child and said, "Well, we'll have to get you used to following our rules here." I smiled, because I've learned the most dangerous thing you can do to a control freak is not give them the reaction they came looking for. I should have known right, then she'd make me a project. When I decided to put in the fence, I treated it like an operation. I read every page of the HOA covenants, all 100+ pages of them, highlighted the fence sections, checked the setbacks, checked the materials, checked the height limits, filled out the architectural application, attached diagrams, material specs, and the property survey. Hand-delivered the packet, got a signed receipt, then waited. 3 weeks later, the approval letter came back, signed, dated, unconditional. I kept copies of everything in a thick manila folder because paperwork, to me, is a weapon when things go sideways. And things went sideways fast. That afternoon was hot and sticky, one of those days where the air feels like wet cloth against your skin. I came out to my driveway and found a demolition crew already at work, pulling up the fence section by section, while Karen stood there in the middle of it with a clipboard tucked to her chest like it was the Constitution. The chipper roared every few seconds and spat out what had been my labor, my money, my dog's security, my family's privacy. I walked up and said as calmly as I could, "Karen, I have written approval. You saw it yourself." She didn't even blink. She said the board had passed an emergency addendum to Bylaw 7.4, subsection C, no more picket fences on corner lots, aesthetic cohesion, best interests of the community, all that nonsense. I asked when this happened, why nobody had been notified, where the community vote was, and she just got puffier with every word like power itself was inflating her. Then she said my fence was a clear and present danger to property values. A danger. I remember hearing that and feeling something in me go very still. Army training does that to you sometimes. When other people get loud, you get quieter. I took out my phone and started recording. I asked her to repeat herself, asked if she was confirming that she had hired a crew to destroy my private property without a court order, without due process, based on an unannounced emergency rule. Instead of backing down, she doubled up. Said I'd be billed for the demolition crew, fined $2,000 for the original violation, and if I didn't pay, they'd slap a lien on my house so fast it would make my head spin. That was when it stopped being petty and became war. Sarah came home from her nursing shift and found me standing in the driveway looking at the empty scar where the fence had been. I'll be honest, seeing her face hurt worse than watching the wood go through that machine. She looked exhausted, confused, then furious. "Mark, where's the fence?" she asked, and when I told her the whole story, her eyes went hard in that way military spouses get when somebody's picked the wrong family to mess with. She said we needed to sue immediately. I told her we would. Just not yet. I didn't want noise, I wanted position. I didn't want outrage, I wanted leverage. That night, after she went to bed, I opened the HOA portal and started digging. No emergency addendum. No notice. Notivaíz vida. No record of any legal change at all. Then I called the 3 people who had signed my approval. The first 2 didn't answer, their voicemails were full, which told me plenty. The third, a retired civil engineer named Arthur McAllister, picked up and said, before I even got halfway through my sentence, "Meet me for coffee tomorrow, somewhere outside the neighborhood." That was the first twist, the moment I realized Karen hadn't just crossed a line with me. She'd been running a whole quiet reign of fear. Arthur met me at a little diner 5 miles away, tweed jacket, black coffee, the kind of man who looked like he'd been disappointed by incompetence for 40 straight years. He slid a copy of the approval meeting minutes across the table. Unanimous vote. Fully legal. Then he told me Karen had staged a sham emergency board meeting with just herself and her secretary, no quorum, no proper notice, no authority to retroactively overturn anything. She'd leaned on the other ARC members too, threatened to go hunting for violations on their homes if they didn't shut up and fall in line. That was all I needed. I called an old friend of mine, Ben Carter, who used to work JAG before he got into private property law. Ben has a real talent for sounding cheerful when somebody else is about to have the worst month of their life. He listened, then said, "Mark, she has handed you a personal injury wrapped inside a governance failure with a side of fraud. Don't move. Don't threaten. Document everything." So we did. Ben drafted a demand letter, so sharp it might as well have had a blade on it. Full replacement cost for the fence, survey costs, legal fees, punitive damages, notice of litigation if the HOA didn't make it right. We sent it certified mail to the HOA and directly to Karen's house. 12 days later she responded herself, not through a lawyer, which should tell you a lot about how untouchable she thought she was. The letter was dripping with condescension, called our claims hostile and frivolous, and included an invoice for the demolition crew. She fined me $2,000 for the fence, then billed me $3,500 for tearing it down. I actually laughed when I read it. Not because it was funny, but because arrogance like that leaves fingerprints. Around then I started walking the neighborhood every evening with General on his leash. I didn't knock on doors making speeches, I just talked to people. Asked how they liked living there, how things had been lately. At first folks were guarded. Then a young couple, the Garcias, told me Karen had fined them because their kid's portable basketball hoop disrupted aesthetic harmony. Mrs. Gable, an elderly widow, showed me the letter ordering her to remove a set of ceramic garden gnomes her late husband had given her on their travels. Then I met Dave Rossetti, retired Marine gunnery sergeant, standing under a bare flagpole because Karen had cited his American flag setup for not being on an approved manufacturer list. That was when the second act really began. For households turned into 6, then 10, then more. We started meeting in my fence-less backyard around a portable fire pit, papers spread across the table, everybody bringing copies, violation notices, emails, invoices, meeting records, photographs. Patterns emerged fast. Selective enforcement, fake urgency, intimidation, nonsense citations aimed at whoever looked least likely to fight back. Karen wasn't protecting the neighborhood. She was using the HOA like a personal weapon. Ben had us request the HOA's records under state law, financials, vendor contracts, board minutes, everything since Karen took office. If the board complied, we'd find the rot. If they refused, that refusal would become evidence itself. She ignored the request entirely, which was exactly the mistake we hoped she'd make. And then, in what might still be my favorite moment of this whole mess, Karen handed me the instrument of her own destruction. She sent a community-wide email announcing a beautification initiative. All old fencing along the main road would be replaced with uniform white vinyl, subsidized by the HOA, homeowners responsible for the rest, approved contractors only, installation on the property line in accordance with the subdivision plat. My house was on that line. So was hers. Now months earlier, when I first planned my cedar fence, I'd looked at old county plats and noticed the boundary between our lots seemed odd. Not enough to act on then, just enough to remember. So after her little beautification order, I hired the best survey firm I could find and told them I wanted a boundary survey so clean a judge could frame it. They found the original iron pins buried below the sod, measured everything twice, then laid the map on my dining table. Karen's holly hedge, part of her stone patio, her fancy outdoor kitchen, her prize rose beds, even that smug little Japanese maple she bragged about every spring. All of it sat several feet inside my property line. I just stood there smiling at the paper. Because here's the thing people like Karen never understand. When you spend your life using sloppy power, you assume everybody else is sloppy too. She thought reality worked by momentum. She thought if something had been treated as hers for 30 years, then it was hers forever. But a property line does not care about your confidence, your title, your voice, or your moo-moo. It cares about pins in the ground. So I played nice. At the next HOA meeting I stood up, calm as can be, and said I wanted to cooperate with the new fence initiative for the good of the community. The room murmured. Karen smiled like she'd broken me. The next morning I hired one of her approved contractors, attached the certified survey, flagged the legal boundary, and put in writing, in plain, unavoidable language, that the fence was to be installed exactly on the legal property line with no deviation. Then I waited until she left town for some ridiculous HOA leadership conference in Orlando. The crew arrived Friday morning and built that white vinyl fence exactly where the survey said it belonged. Saturday, Karen came home and let out a scream so wild it sounded prehistoric. I walked out with my coffee and my phone recording. The fence split her backyard clean in two. On her side, back door grill, a strip of grass. On my side, the patio, the outdoor kitchen, the roses, the maple, all of it. She was red in the face, shaking, screaming that I'd destroyed her yard, that I'd be arrested, that this was illegal. I held up the survey and said, "Actually, Karen, I followed the rules. Your rules." When the deputies came, they reviewed the survey, the HOA directive, the signed contractor instructions, then told her flat out it was a civil matter and the fence appeared legal. The look on her face when the deputy said, "That doesn't change property lines, ma'am," after she announced she was HOA president. I'm not proud of how much I enjoyed that, but I enjoyed it a lot. After that, the whole thing accelerated. We filed in court to compel records. Her cheap lawyer sent a laughable threat. Ben Canter Loimed. Our homeowner coalition, which had quietly grown to more than 30 households, put together a full dossier and sent one copy to the HOA's insurance carrier, another to the state regulatory agency. Once the insurer started questioning whether Karen's conduct was even covered, panic set in. And at the annual homeowner meeting, with proxies in hand in a packed clubhouse, we finally brought the whole rotten thing into the light. Dave stood up in his dress blues and moved to remove the board. I presented the evidence, my approved fence, the demolition, the fake fines, the abuse of the Garcias, Mrs. Gable, Dave, the inflated invoices. Then I projected the survey showing the line through Karen's patio and put that shady demolition bill right next to a legitimate competing quote that was thousands lower. The room turned on her all at once, like a switch had been flipped. Hands went up everywhere. The board was removed on the spot. Arthur became interim president. The new board hired Ben. Fines were suspended. The records were opened. And that's where the final twist hit. Karen wasn't just a bully. She was dirty. The forensic audit found a pattern: inflated landscaping invoices, overpriced contractor bills, checks funneled through one favorite vendor, cash moving in ways cash should not move if everybody's honest. It looked like kickbacks because it was kickbacks. The board turned everything over to the district attorney. 3 months later, Karen was arrested on felony fraud and embezzlement charges. By then she was already forced to sell her house. Before the sale could close, her patio and outdoor kitchen had to come off my land. I sat on the back porch and watched a demolition crew jackhammer that stone into rubble, and I'll tell you the truth, it didn't feel joyful, not exactly. It felt clean, like a ledger being balanced. Sarah and I got paid for the fence, the legal costs, the survey, the damage. General got the secure yard he should have had from the beginning. Mrs. Gable helped us transplant Karen's roses into a community garden near the clubhouse, which is about as poetic as life ever gets. A young family bought Karen's old house, introduced themselves on day one, and asked politely whether their kids could play near the fence. Just like that, the neighborhood felt like a neighborhood again. The lesson, I guess, is this: power doesn't always show up wearing a uniform or sitting behind some giant desk. Sometimes it's a woman with a clipboard, a fake smile, and a crowd of scared people who've been trained to keep their heads down. And sometimes the only way to beat that kind of power is not by shouting louder. It's by staying calm long enough to make the truth impossible to ignore. Karen thought decency was weakness. She thought rules were tools for controlling other people, never boundaries for herself. In the end, that was what buried her. Not my anger, not revenge, not luck. Her own arrogance, documented line by line, signature by signature, invoice by invoice. So tell me this: when somebody abuses a little bit of power to terrorize a whole community, is it enough to beat them in court? Or do they deserve to lose everything that power bought them? Drop your thoughts in the comments, tell me where you're watching from, and if you've ever dealt with an HOA bully, a petty tyrant, or somebody who thought the rules only applied to everybody else? I want to hear your story.